Today, we will be reading chapter 13 of The Destruction of Black Civilization, The Black World at the Crossroads, where Chancellor Williams talks about the real problem and hopefully some real solutions.
Greetings. My name is the Revolutionary Matron, and my show is called The Learning Curve. I broadcast on a network called KWAZ Radio. There are other hosts on the network I'd like you to meet.
Greetings, everyone. This is Koku from the Bitter Medicine Podcast, inviting you to tune in to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the Pro-Black Perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
This is D Webb with the Harsh Reality Podcast, asking you to tune in where we tackle the news of the day that affects our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed here belong solely to the respondents, and they do not necessarily reflect any broadcast networks, affiliates, nor sponsors. The Learning Curve is a broadcast created for the benefit of my global community. Black is a consciousness. Content is being used for our commentary, research, criticism, education, scholarship, teaching, preaching, and news reporting. No copyright infringement is intended. I will make enunciation mistakes. I will give you my opinion about the information. And if you ever ask, I will send you my source.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am so glad you're here. Thanks for tuning in. Today, we're reading chapter 13 of Chancellor Williams' The Destruction of Black Civilization, The Black World at the Crossroads. One of the most troublesome facts in the study of history over very long periods of time, such as several centuries, is that the truth may slowly emerge, period after period, until it clearly forms itself into a truth impregnable, a fact nowhere explicitly stated as such in the mass of data covered. As one continues to move on down through the centuries, countless events and situations may continue to make supporting additions to what has already been established as an unassailable fact. Yet the truth may be so repugnant, so utterly void of any rationale or intelligent reason for existence that hardly any historian would wish to state it in his work. Yet I did just that when I wrote that the whites are the implacable foe, the traditional and everlasting enemy of the blacks. The compelling reason for publicly putting this declaration in its historical context is clear. The necessary re-education of blacks and a possible solution of racial crises can begin. Strangely enough, only when blacks fully realize this central fact in their lives, the white man is their bitter enemy. For this is not the ranting, wild-eyed militancy, but the calm and unmistakable verdict of several thousand years of documented history. Even the sample case study of 10 Black states in this work shows that each and every one of those states was destroyed by whites. So as you can see, we have a historical enemy, and it is anyone and anything that identifies itself as white. You can eat white bread and know that it's not good for you. Wheat bread is better for you. Whole grain bread is better for you. White people have destroyed our kingdoms over and over and over again through social and sexual integration. There is no mistake when you really look at the data and the information that's available. Facing this reality does not call for increasing hatred or screaming and utterly futile denunciations. Far from it. For all these shouting emotional outbursts by Blacks are in themselves indications of weakness because they becloud the mind and prevent the calm and clear thinking that is absolutely required for planning if the race is to be saved from its final destruction. And no, destruction is not too strong of a term here. Only fools will be unable to see that the race is again being hemmed in, surrounded by its enemies, and cannot survive forever under what might be called a state of gradual siege. Those Negroes who are still pleading with the whites for brotherhood through integration are so deaf and blind that they are unable to get the white enemy's reply to any of these frantic pleas for acceptance through integration. Integration is not our answer. It never has been and it never will be. The reply of whites was so loud and clear that it was heard around the world when segregation in schools and residences was outlawed throughout the United States. Whites fled from the cities to the suburbs just as though a plague had struck or some deadly disease was spreading. We called it white flight. The Blacks were left alone in the cities, now called ghettos or the inner city. This was rejection, total and complete. The Black youth of America got this message from the whites first, and they got it quickly. They formed new battle lines. Several millions of quote unquote middle class Negroes and their leaders have not yet received the message and probably never will. For them, the white man is the ship and all else is the sea. That's sad. They themselves do not feel competent to develop the highest standards of life in the all Black communities created by the very whites they so much worship. For them, there can be no quality education unless by hook or by crook some white faces, any kind of white faces, are in the classroom. Even if those white faces are malevolent bastards trying to harm your children, they just want to be taught by white people. They just want to be around white people. So that is what these middle class Negroes of the time had going on. Greetings, Forecast. How are you today? Their main drive is to force the fleeing whites to accept them, or please, oh you superior people, allow us to bus some of our children to your schools. As they achieve these hollow victories on the integration front, they get a new cry. They add to it a new cry: give us racial balance. These Negroes have neither the ethnic pride nor the self-respect that is so characteristic of the American Indians, Japanese, and Chinese, and they seem utterly insensitive to being openly rejected by the whites and battle on with the fantastic idea that they can force white people to accept them socially. And that is a fantastic idea, but it's not reality. You can't force these people to accept you. Accept the fact that just live with and accept the fact that they don't want to be around you and build your own community for yourself. That's what he's getting at. One major reason why young Black America understood the white position so quickly was that by some happy circumstance in history, they were more closely attuned to the great common people and therefore shared their common aspirations and common sense. No one has to tell them that there can be no bigger farce than the integration of hatred and oppressed Blacks with the very white enemies who oppress them. Both the farce of integration and the everlasting white enemy are regularly highlighted in the world's press. Race riots in integrated US armies in Europe and even at war in Indochina Race riots in camps in the USA. Race riots on the battleships of integrated U.S. Navy, and in short, open combat between blacks and whites when they are forced together as equals. Forecast says, yeah, but we need white validation. How can we survive without it? We don't need white validation. White validation will never come, first and foremost, and it is called self esteem, second of all. So if you have self esteem or racial pride, those come from within. And until you get to the point where you value yourself enough to stare that white man face to face, you'll never be on top. You'll always be on the bottom because you're always aspiring for something you can never be. A black person can never be white, ever. Not physically white, anyway. There is a peace and harmony, of course, when the blacks humbly stay in their place, their subordinate place. Using the courts to force whites to accept blacks as equals is quite futile, even when and if all the thousands of court battles are won. White America is overwhelmingly against integration, and white Americans are no different than other whites throughout the world. This sentence right here, white Americans are no different than other whites throughout the world, is something we need to pay close attention to because there is no difference between them. They all stick together. A Russian and a Ukrainian are somebody whose grandfathers were related and left the area. One left the area and one stayed. They're not only are they the same people, but they are related to each other and they recognize their relationship with each other. So there's no difference in white people. The only instance in their history when integration was welcomed were when the outcome would put them in a more dominating position or one of personal security, money, and a prestige they could never otherwise achieve. So what he's saying is that you know how so many celebrities wind up with white women? They're only marrying out and they're only integrating, because they have the opportunity for additional personal security, money, and or prestige that they could never achieve on their own. Why did Kim marry Kanye? That put her on a different level than she would have been. And her father was a lawyer, so she already had money. She was going to all the concerts. She was already in the scene. But by marrying and integrating into sexually and socially integrating into the rapper world, that put her on a higher profile that she would have never been able to reach on her own. Hence, because of the high premium many Negroes give to white skin, the most ordinary whites will eagerly marry any black star or any other blacks if they have money. But in no period in history, and this point is important, at no point in history have the masses of blacks sought integration and general amalgamation with the whites. During all of their travails, their pride in race was steadfast. Much of the so-called self-hatred actually reflects a sense of futility and despair over the lack of leadership and unity for action. They, the black masses, rejected general integration as a movement to obliterate the black race as such. So they saw integration as a way to be destroyed as a people. The black masses still reject it. I have pointed out blind alleys into which we are being led by leaders whose aims and objectives are quite personal and not those of the black masses. These black masses demand absolute equality on all fronts, precisely the same rights, privileges, and responsibilities as all other citizens, and without any exceptions whatsoever. This obviously includes the right of every individual to attend the school or college of their choice, rent or buy a home wherever they please, marry whom they please, black or white, and to freely use all places of public accommodation, all of which is a far, far cry from the doctrine that all of this must necessarily include a white presence to be valid or a mass movement by the race toward amalgamation. The presence of whites in any given situation should be incidental if it's considered at all. What the Negroes referred to above seem incapable of grasping is the difference between a good school and a white school, a good community in which to live and a white community. Those are different. They are very different. To them, they are necessarily the same, continuing evidence of the Caucasian success in capturing the minds of Blacks. So instead of seeing a neighborhood that might be predominantly middle class and have people that that are working every day and have, decent scores in the schools and different things on the test scores and things like that, instead of looking at that as a good school because there are Black faces, they will go to a failing white school because they have white faces, because there's no self-esteem, there's no racial pride. And we have to get over that because we have to recognize that these people are our historical enemy and they always have been. Everyone that is able to identify as white is our enemy. And once we face that fact, we can be educated and integrated into a system of Blackness that allows us to forge ahead a pathway that says we can build a good school, we can build a good community. The motherland at the crossroads. The problem is essentially the same in our African homeland. There too, white is still the standard of excellence and what is right, wise, and best. I personally know of a number of African presidents and ministers who will dare not to make important decisions without the guidance of white advisors, men who often know far less about the questions at hand than the presidents and their ministers, but they feel the need for a white seal of approval. And we have to dismantle the person inside of our heads, inside of our psyche that says we need white seals of approval. We don't. The Blacks, therefore, still have a long way to go in order to achieve absolute equality as free men among free men. They have a long way to go in the United States and the numerous other areas in which they live all over the world. In Africa, at the time of this writing, Tanzania leads the first hard-headed, masses-oriented socioeconomic program that is expressly designed to raise the level of life of the whole people, beginning with those lowest down. It is a truly African program, drawing heavily on African cultural traditions. It was, from its very inception, too much for those of the elite who think of independence as a mere transfer of power from a white ruling class to a Black upper class, leaving the masses no better off than they had been under colonialism. These are the kind of smug and cocksure leaders who are preparing for the great, not for the great, preparing the ground for military coups, mass uprisings such as Africa has not yet witnessed. The first line of action should center around the study and development of nationwide, people involved, self-help cooperative programs, village by village, town by town, and block by block. Each community would do its own development planning. The government's principal role would be to provide advisors, training, technical assistance, and loans when and where these are needed. For people with little or no money, barter and exchange are the first steps towards economic salvation, the basis for capital formation. Increased food production should be seen for both wealth and health. The main emphasis would be inter-community relations between the various language groups in all development programs. This means agreement plans for each area to specialize in producing goods, but not goods needed but not produced in the other regions. This is the direct route to national unity through cooperation in order to reach the goals desired in common by all language groups in each African state. This, this calls for thinking, planning, and hard work. Now, it is just here within the race where integration is not only needed, but is mandatory. We shall remain a weak people until we begin the drive for integration of Blacks first of all, instead of battling to integrate with other people. The second great task of government calls for furthering the home front economic development by aggressively working for African economic unity on a scale never before attempted. Interstate trade and other economic programs designed to deal with Asia and Europe must begin with unity of action in Africa itself, region by region, and then interregional or continental efforts. If Black Africa is ever to free itself from the present economic morass, this is what we have to do, is integrate into Blackness. We have to have each country, each area producing something that other areas need and then trading fairly and favorably with one another. That's how we work out our differences. Now we will be able to cover our failures by endlessly sweating and fumbling over South Africa. Black Africa can never deal effectively with white-ruled areas until it deals with Black Africa itself first. The foundation for everything we do or wish to do is economic, a word that simply means wealth enough to be really independent and having the means to do what must be done. If we have not noticed that every one of the great Black nations studied rose as the result of a variety of wealth-producing activities, which then enabled them to achieve set goals, if we miss this fact, then we miss the most important lesson they left us in this book. Another significant fact was the widespread trade between early African states. Somehow, they overrode the communication barriers about which we now hear so much about. The crying first need throughout the African world, however, is dedicated to leaders, not just the office-holding bureaucrats, but men and women leaders who will be more and more in the field among the people and less preoccupied in offices with paperwork. These will be the people on a mission to improve the lives of the people rather than enriching themselves. Meanwhile, a frustrated people send up a silent prayer, often heavy with tears. Please, O God, send us a few real leaders, just a few, Lord. Wanted, leaders and an African ideology. The Black people of the world have therefore come at last to destiny's crossroad. They must make some fundamental decisions as a single people. We're at one of these crossroads in the United States of America when it comes to who we're going to swing our votes behind to vote for president, or are we going to sit home and let these white people work it out amongst themselves? We're at another crossroad where we have to make a decision as a single people. The one hopeful sign is that they are slowly and painfully coming to their hitherto beclouded senses, coming to realize that they are one people with a common destiny, and that no matter how scattered over the world they are, the treatment suffered by one Black group is suffered by all. But there is a terrible crisis of leadership at the crossroads. There is no united leadership group or any real effort to create one. The great difficulty is that Black leaders, again, unlike the Jews, do not know what their own heritage is. They are almost wholly ignorant of their own cultural source from which independent, original thinking springs and progress is inspired. The Negro leaders who spearhead and carry on campaigns for integration, amalgamation, or death and destruction being the aim, not only do not know the great heritage of the Blacks, they do not want to know it. They wish to draw on the Caucasian heritage and become identified with it. They are totally rejected by the whites, but no matter, they keep on trying because the white liberals do encourage them to hope by mixing with them from time to time. Other leaders, equally ignorant of their heritage, simply do not know which way to lead. They too feel compelled to adopt the follow Caucasian ideologies because they do not feel free, equal, and competent enough to develop an ideology of their own, an African-oriented ideology. Hence, many, including some Black youth leaders from whom so much was expected, are jumping out of white capitalistic democracy's frying pan straight into white communism's fire. Neither system was designed for the Black world, yet each is only too anxious to use the Blacks as they have always been used, a numerical power base for white rule. So the liberals don't like us, the communists don't like us, the independents don't like us, the Republicans don't like us, the Unitarians don't like us, the Democrats don't like. None of them have ever served our interests. They only use us as a numerical power base for their continued rule. Moreover, the capitalistic version of democracy and the Soviet version of communism could not only not only could not serve the interests and aspirations of the Black masses, but they do not serve the interests of the white masses. Neither of them. So what he's saying is that capitalism and communism would not serve our interests, and they do not serve the interests of the white masses. So those systems are not in place really to serve the people. Those are just tools of the elite to trick you into buying into whatever ideology that is going to ultimately serve the wealthy. Of course, there would be a much larger class and a more powerful class of Black commissars and Black central committees if communism should spread all over the Black world, and more Black capitalists if capitalism becomes the prevailing way of life. In each case, we have not a theory or a speculation, but a plain operating fact that even a fool can see. Both capitalism and communism have ruling classes that suppress and exploit the people. Didn't I just tell you? The mass the masses of people, like so many masses of puppets, are fed and filled with the ideals and principles of both systems. For they fight and die screaming these ideals as though they were drugged. Voting creates an illusion of power that does not exist in fact. It works wonderfully well for the rulers, the real decision makers, because the people in capitalistic democracies actually believe they are deciding and running things. One surprising difference between capitalistic and communistic countries is that the people in communistic countries know that they are powerless. When the United States assumed the leadership role of holding the line of white Western power throughout the world, Russia took over a similar role for the white East European states. The hammer and sickle flag is different than the stars and stripes, but each now represents the same objective. Communism seeks to bring the various peoples of the world under the white supremacy of white communist states under Russian domination. Our capitalistic democracy aims to do the same thing, white rule under American domination. Hence, the Cold War, which has nothing to do with communism itself. The so called Cold War is, in fact, a contest between two of the strongest white powers for world domination. Okay? That's what the Cold War is. Because communism is not the real issue, as capitalism is not the real issue on the communist side. The United States will form alliances and give all out aid and support to a communist country just as quickly, and some say more quickly, than to just as fast as they would to a non communist country. Anything to weaken not communism, but Russia, the chief white challenge for world rule. So all of that is saying that they're just two different sides of the same coin. Russia, the United States. In the United States, they keep up this illusion of inclusion by letting you vote every few years. And in places like Russia, you don't get the chance to vote. Politics is a joke. As between these two giants, the choice of the blacks can only be a choice between two groups of white masters, although the yoke and shackles of one are attractively painted red. Nor will the blacks find their salvation in Mao's China or any third world in which they will still be in a subordinate position. To be equal, they must first stand on their own 2 feet. In order for the black man to be equal, we have to stand on our own 2 feet. In this capitalism versus communism connection, the immediate trouble confronting the blacks is that so many millions of them have been made so wholly dependent on the white race for so many generations that they have become mentally lazy. For these, dependence has become comfortable. It frees them from the initiative, responsibility, and planning required of independent free men and women. Leave it to the white folks has become their unspoken creed. They have not yet come to realize that this attitude of dependency by so many is responsible for the whole race being characterized as children and men being called boys. To be recognized as men, they seem to not know they must aggressively assume the role of real men. And this is why so many Black leaders expect the solution to the so called race problem to be handed to them on silver platters of white ideologues. This excuses them from both the mental task of working out their own and the labor required for actually carrying through a united action program, first nationwide, then worldwide. It is needless to say what elementary common sense dictates. which is that when the African people achieve enough unity to develop the ideological guidelines for their own advancement, they will draw what is best for them from any or all existing systems as a simple matter of course. For whatever an African organized way of life might be, they would not hesitate any more than Stalin and the Soviet leaders when they brought in capitalists from the United States, Germany, and England, not to adopt capitalism, but to learn those capitalistic skills, techniques, and methods which would be useful in building a great Soviet Union. So you take away from them the very best of their ideals without adopting their systems. The emerging communist states drew heavily on capitalism when it served their purpose, openly and without apology. Hence, they became equal with the greatest powers without changing their own ideology. These observations are addressed only when those who seem to not know that one may extract what he needs from capitalism and communism without becoming a capitalist or a communist. So you can eat the meat and spit out the bones of any ideology you decide to adopt and look at. And you can then create your own ideology instead of saying, oh, I'm a capitalist, I'm a communist, I'm a socialist, I'm a Marxist, I'm a this, I'm a that. You don't have to adopt any of those, but you can take the very best of what they have to offer and create your own ideology. The Black unity threat. No one seems to have noticed or understood the signals from the white world, signals which tell how tremendously important the white regard of any movement towards unity among Blacks. Nothing racial seems to upset them anymore. That is why they insist on being in on any Black organizational movement, either as financially supporting members or as advisors, observers, or reporters. White people always want to be involved in Black movements. Black Lives Matter was co opted by white women. To bar them from any exclusively all Black conference is regarded as something a little less than treason or some kind of Black conspiracy in the making. On the other hand, no Blacks are ever present at all white conferences where the fate of Blacks everywhere is discussed and decided. Unity among the Blacks has been prevented for so many centuries that the various mechanisms to keep Blacks disorganized have been perfected in the Western system of race control. The white man is keenly aware of the tremendous power of any well-organized groups. But an organization of Blacks on a scope that would present the voice of Black America would be a threat and a challenge not only to continued white domination of the Blacks in the United States, but also foreign policies and practices that affect the lives of African people elsewhere in the world. But the apprehension of whites about the possibility of real Black unity appears to be quite as needless now as in the past. For we are still in the meeting and talking stage of our history and not appear to be ready even to begin the attack on the obviously built-in obstacles. These obstacles have been pointed out over and over again in this study. They had to be emphasized and could not possibly be overemphasized because in addition to the historic reasons for our own self-generated disunity, no other non-white people on earth are in the dangerous situation of having so many of their leaders selected, appointed, sponsored, or financed by the white ruling classes. In the case of the Blacks in the United States, and the same is true of Blacks elsewhere. These Negro heads of important institutions and organizations represent the white man's indirect rule over the Black community. It is the voice of these leaders that is accepted as the voice of the race. They do indeed have a great following drawn upon almost entirely from the traditional Negro elite or the upper middle class. Lawyers, government officials, doctors, professors, school administrators, scientists, engineers, head of integrationist organizations like the NAACP and SNCC, and all of these different groups all have a indirect white rule. Those are indirect white rule organizations. They are essentially anti-Black, anti-African, and therefore anti-Black studies. Hence, their frantic drive for integration, which of course will effectively check the alarming development of pride in race, a sense of cultural identity with one's own bloodline, and a growing knowledge of being members of a race with a record of achievements unsurpassed by any other people. Despite the conversion of so much that was Black to white, this, the Negro leadership, would destroy even at its inception by forcing the Black youth of America more directly under white education, direction, and control. A vengeful striking back at Black youth for starting a revolt against their mental enslavement in the first place. So what he's saying is that these the Black middle class forces our children into predominantly white institutions, tells them to go get corporate jobs, tells them that they need to vote for one of two white people that are both old and aged and have uh, no interest in solving their problems. And it's almost like a vengeful striking back at the youth for starting any type of revolt against their mental enslavement. Because once you start going to school and you start getting some knowledge and some information about your culture and history, you quickly begin to see that you've been lied to all of your life. The first 12 years of your academic career is predominantly lies. And you get mad about that and you start to revolt. And they have a buffer class in place to help quell the revolts and quell the rebellions. That is the Black middle class. In a panel discussion with 3 other university presidents, the head of one major white university said, "Integration is a very misleading term. Our Black students are as separate from the white students as they are in the general society, and they know it. They come because of the vast number of special scholarships offered to them. This is a wise program from our point of view. It brings more of the future Black leaders into a more traditionally American environment. We are not disturbed by their demand for Black studies, for these, of course, will be gradually phased out as their emotions cool." So a white handler at a predominantly white institution said, "Yeah, so what? They asked for Black studies. We may give it to them, we may not. These people that come to this school are just as isolated in their own little bubble at our university as they would be as intelligent Negroes in the real world because they don't have a place to fit in. And even if we give them this Black Studies program, it'll eventually be phased out because they're not going to be as emotional about it as time goes on." That same month, which was May 1971, a Negro professor declared, "Black studies are ridiculous at any university. I am not Black and I will not join in this new hypocrisy. I am a Negro, yet outside the United States, I am considered white. Now, we know that there are some places in the world that don't see color as a black white issue, and that there are some places, especially on the continent of Africa, that would call a black American person white. Well, that's because of their cultural norms. But we know what it is. And for a Negro leader, professor of a black institution to sit there and say that he's not black because he has traveled a little bit doesn't change the reality that he faces each and every day, as a black person in the United States of America. Now, forecast says white women can infiltrate anything. Absolutely, they can. And integration versus assimilation. Integration and assimilation are different because integration is supposed to allow you to maintain your own identity, but an assimilation is supposed to slowly absorb you into their culture. But they both in America have the same goal. They both want to get rid of you and get rid of your blackness. They want to amalgamate, they want to totally mix you in and wash away your blackness. They want to whitewash your identity. On a recent TV program, the head of a militant black movement went even further. In response to a question, he said, "Look at me. I am neither black, Negro, nor African. I am a Moor. My roots are in Asia." He was born in Mississippi. But the moderator pressed on, "You call your movement a black movement." "Ah," the great Moorish leader replied, "that's strategy." Apparently satisfied that the black masses did not hear him, or if they did, they would not understand. And that's that Afro-Asiatic black man mess that they go through, where they sit there and they try to co-opt some other identity instead of blackness. Well, first of all, more means black, so in any language, you were still black. I don't know why people go and do this mental gymnastics to get away from being African, but they need to stop it. Quite relevant to all this, I have made several points above. One was that notwithstanding the white man's well-developed system of maintaining disunity within the African race, he is still disturbed by any signs of a movement towards unity among blacks and goes into action in many subtle ways to offset it. The important point is the most disheartening. This is the fact that the white man really has nothing to fear from any effective unity among blacks for a long, long time, because he himself installs and backs most of the key leaders of the race, two of which I have just quoted above, and the number is legion. We still have in the closing years of the 20th century, therefore, exactly the same unique problem that confronted Africans in Egypt over 6,000 years ago. And we challenge any student of history to point out any other people who are or have been saddled with a perpetually disunifying and progress checking problem of this magnitude. Greetings, Raw. How are you tonight? For a while, the white man has mingled his blood with non-white peoples from times immemorial. In no other people was the outcome a hostile race within a race. No other non-white people with Caucasian blood, whether Indian, Japanese, or Chinese, feel any compelling reason for integration, a code word for amalgamation with the whites. Quite the contrary, they resist it as a policy or an acceptable general practice. The only hope for the kind of racial unity that will really liberate the blacks in America and command the respect of the world will be a new kind of mass organization on a scale with an action program never before attempted. This will require a new kind of leadership, a leadership with the single purpose of helping the masses up towards a better life. We are noted for our countless organizations, large and small. Each is an independent kingdom struggling to become an empire under a great chief. This is inevitable in the circumstances. But as the history of Africa, not one of these, standing alone, can meet the mounting crisis of the race. If they will not unite, the race need not continue in despair because of unyielding pride and individual leaders. A people's mass organization movement can override all obstacles, but will this be done? The subtitle of this book, Great Issues of a Race from 4500 BC to 2000 AD, has puzzled some readers. 2000 AD? That is the end of this century, and we are not there yet. The subtitle, however, not only reflects the author's conviction that the main obstacle which confronted us in the past and are with us today will still be with us in the year 2000 and after, but also that for the rest of this century, it is very likely that the Blacks will still be meeting, listening to, and applauding soul stirring speeches, protesting and denouncing injustice, or happily relying on politics as the ultimate solution to our problems. The frustrations, confusion of goals, and a sense of helplessness are likely to continue into the next century. When Black youth began as the foundation for a new and mighty advance may be, and indeed is being defeated. But when the task of what must be done is undertaken by this generation or left to the next, one thing is certain. It can never be said again that the Black race does not know exactly what to do, or that not a single member of the race ever carefully studied and then presented a comprehensive plan as one way out. In the final pages of this work, offer such a plan. It is not the plan, but a plan, a comprehensive basis for beginning and improving, but beginning. So Chancellor Williams, as you can see, outright said that white people were the problem, and that with Black people, their whole objective was amalgamation. They wanted nothing more. They wanted nothing more than to take the very best of what Black culture has to offer and bring it back into their fold. Let's see what's going on in the chat. I'm so grateful Sister Raw is here. How are you tonight? I'm grateful that you were able to come through and hang out with us tonight. Make sure you listen to the playback. We are getting ready to end the show. Chapter 14 is what we will be reading tomorrow. No, excuse me, we'll be reading Wednesday. Chapter 14, Organizing a Race for Action. So today we read chapter 13, and chapter 13 was called Black World at the Crossroads. So we have to understand where we are and get to the point where we understand who our historical enemy is and what they're actually doing. We have disunity from the outside, and we have external factors which are also impacting us in an attempt to prevent us from uniting. Because if we unite, then their whole game is over. There's a picture of a Monopoly game on top of the backs of several Black people. And it's like if we just stand up and be men and women, the whole game is over because their table is destroyed because they're playing on the backs of us. Well, I appreciate you, Brother Bakari, for the Cash App. I appreciate you, Sister Raw, for the Cash App, and Forecast for the Cash App. And you too, Dorico Cooper. Thank you so much for the Cash Apps. I appreciate you. And I value each and every one of you. I hope that you have a lovely evening. And peace, fam.